What is up? I'm Hugo, a photographer from Finland, and I absolutely love photographing the Northern Lights. And today I'm gonna be teaching you how I take Northern Light photos and how you can as well. More specifically, we'll go through 1. How to find the Northern Lights, 2. The gear you need, 3. The settings to use, and 4. The compositions you could use when taking these photos. But before we start, may I ask you a favor? I know that around 69% of you currently watching this haven't subscribed to my channel, so if you have enjoyed any of my videos in the past, please consider subscribing. This allows me to bring more and more value to you here on YouTube consistently. Do we have a deal? Hopefully you consider subscribing, and now let's start, my friends. 1. How to find the Northern Lights. This part could be complicated, but let's keep it simple. What you need to do to see the Northern Lights is 1. Be in the north, 2. Have a forecast or an app to monitor the possibility of the lights, 3. Find a location with as less light pollution as possible, and 4. Have clear skies. That's it. But let's take each of those and dive a bit deeper into them. So, being in the north. Now, I live in the very north, so I live in Finland, and currently I'm staying in northern Norway, and you might not be living this north. But no worries, you might still be able to see them as well. Now, this past year in 2023, they were spotted all the way in Switzerland, Italy, and even Greece, I believe. So it's definitely possible. And they were in Japan as well. In the past, the lights have also been observed in southern India, the Caribbean, and even the Sahara. But by no means is that common. The last time they were seen in Sahara was 1872. But it's possible. The lights in Japan are more common though, although they aren't very common either. They were last seen, not counting now last year, in 2003. But overall, the Central Europe and the United States are places where you can see them a few times a year if you're lucky. Especially now that we are about to hit the peak of the solar cycle, and what that peak means is that there's a ton of activity from the sun. And that's how the Northern Lights get created in the first place. And that brings us to a forecast. You want to make sure you monitor space weather. I use 2 different forecasts. One is more simple and one is more complicated. The easy one is an app called Aurora, and it can be found in both the App Store and the Google Play Store. It tells you what are the chances to see the auroras, and you don't necessarily need to understand anything regarding the space weather when you're using this app. If you are new onto this is what I recommend for you. But if you have already photographed the Northern Lights a bit, or you want to just go for it and learn the best tools, then I recommend spaceweatherlive.com for you. It has more graphs and information, and I personally trust it the absolute most. It is a learning curve, but basically you want that the graphs are either yellow or red color, which means that there is a crazy storm happening and you have a very good chance of seeing the auroras. But you can still see them even when the graphs are green, again depending a bit on other factors and where you are on Earth. They also have an app which is called Space Weather Live. But keep in mind that both of these are forecasts. That the Aurora app has told me previously that, hey Hugo, you have like 0% chance of seeing them in your hometown. But what has happened? I have seen them. So don't take this literally. The only way you can actually find out is by going out and see them for yourself. But these forecasts are there to help you out with the decision, is it worth to going out and waiting for the possibility of seeing the Northern Lights. Location with less light pollution. It's recommended that you'd be at least 15 kilometers away from the nearest street light when taking a night photo. Does that sound like a very easy task to you? I've done it like once. So you don't need to be at a perfect dark place. The darker it is, the more powerful the lights will look, and the darker it is, the more easily you will see the lights. Oftentimes I just photograph them very near my home, so I will go and there will be like street lights like 500 meters away. So it works fine, but I notice immediately that it's not really perfect. But ideally you would be somewhere very far away from the street lights, and then the lights just look next level. But aim to find a dark place overall, although nowadays it is quite difficult to do. You can search for dark spots on websites such as lightpollutionmap.info. Have clear skies. I guess this is quite simple, but if there are clouds you will not see anything. The lights are always above the clouds. So you want to make sure that there is at least some sort of a chance that the sky would open up if it's not totally clear, because otherwise you will not see anything. So indeed, you do not need an entirely clear sky. In fact, some people want to have some clouds there because it creates some mood to the image. Often I head out if it's at least half cloudy, but if the activity is super strong, then I'm gonna head out even if it seems that it's gonna be very cloudy. But I want to have at least some sort of a chance that there could be a small break in the clouds, or otherwise I'm just gonna stay in. Again, remember, normal forecasts are forecasts too, so you will not know how does it look if you don't actually look outside. Sometimes, especially in the north, the forecast will say like, hey, now it is cloudy, but then it will actually be totally clear. And it has happened to me here whilst in Norway as well, and many times before this. If you are photographing near your home or your accommodation, just have a look outside, and that's the easiest and most accurate way to see what kind of weather there is out there. 2. The gear you need. Thankfully, this part is quite simple. You don't need a lot of gear. You basically need 3 main things, which are a camera, a lens, and a tripod. Now, of course, there are certain things you want to be looking for in cameras and lenses, so let's dive deeper into those. Let's start with the camera. So it's best if your camera is a full frame camera, because this allows your camera to receive more light into its sensor, resulting in much better image quality. And the better image quality is a result of you having better settings on your camera, because your camera receives more light, so you don't need to use as high of an ISO as you otherwise might. So a full frame camera is ideal for this. I use the Sony a7 III. It also has a great dynamic range, which helps with the editing side of things, and you should always shoot in RAW when being photographing at night, because during night there can be a lot of stuff gone wrong and you want to have the flexibility in post-production to fix some mistakes. So what is dynamic range? Dynamic range basically is how much detail can you recover from the bright areas and dark areas of your photographs. So this is not as big of a deal if you expose your photos correctly. For now, focus on having a full frame camera. Now, an APS-C camera could be fine, I'm not sure, but a full frame is definitely the ideal one to go with. Lenses then. The lens should have as small of an f-stop number as possible. I use the Laowa 50mm f2, so that gets in quite much light, of course. Any lens that has a smaller f-stop than f4 should be fine. I would recommend to have as wide of a lens as possible. Of course, I don't know about the fisheye lens, but personally I have the 50mm and I still feel at times that like, I wish I had like a even wider lens. So I don't think you can go like way too wide with this. I think you can just go way too tight. As a rule of thumb, we could say that ideally you would have less than 16mm as the focal length. Of course, if you have like 21mm, you can still take photos with that one, obviously, but the photos will just be very different and you will not get as much of the night sky into your photos as maybe you would wish for. The tripod. You need a tripod. You can't miss this part. It doesn't matter if you have a full frame camera and a great lens if you do not have a tripod, because when you're photographing at night, you need to have a long shutter speed, and it is impossible to hold the camera as still as necessary during the night. That's just how we humans are. We can't stay still. Now, I don't have any specific recommendations for a tripod, but basically you don't want to get the lightest tripod out there, because if it's a bit windy, then your photos will also end up blurry. But you might not also want the most heaviest one if you're hiking, so you need to find a compromise somewhere there. And do not get the cheapest tripod out there. When I started out, I got like a 70 € tripod, and I think it broke like immediately, although like we got the money back, no problem. But like now I have like a 200 or 300 € tripod, and this is not actually that good. It does the job, but like I want to invest into a much more expensive one in the future as well. Of course, it's not all about the price, it's about the quality. And this all kind of depends on which kind of conditions and scenes you want to photograph with the northern lights, because if you are like next to the ocean, it's gonna be very different from like if you are like in the middle of your country and it's not windy at all. Great, now you're good to go gear-wise. Now let's talk on how to not ruin your northern lights images with bad settings. 3 settings. First of all, you want to be shooting on manual. Auto settings and autofocus does not work at night. Don't do it, please trust me. When you use manual, you will have the complete control how your images look like, and that's what exactly you want. A camera with auto settings at night is a recipe for a nightmare. Let's start with the f-stop. As I mentioned earlier, you want to have as low of an f-stop number as possible. This allows the sensor to get more light through the lens, and this will help you set out a good ISO. But the smaller the f-stop number is, the smaller part of your photo will be in focus. That is why you must decide whether to focus on the sky, on the northern lights, or the foreground or your subject if it's not the northern lights. Or do you want to focus stack 2 or more photos in post-production? Focus stacking means stacking multiple in-focus images to create a single focused image. This can be done in Adobe Photoshop, but it is not necessary. I rarely focus stack any of my northern light images. If you want to have everything absolutely in focus, a focus stacking is a must though. ISO. Have it as small as possible as well, but oftentimes you need to go at least to 3200. The lower your ISO is, the better your image quality will be and the less noise there will be. But be careful, do not underexpose too much. That's what I used to do, and then I had to bring up the exposure back in Lightroom and the photos just didn't look as good. So be brave using the ISO. Nowadays the cameras are so good, especially if you have that full frame camera, that you can push it to at least 3200. Recently I was photographing a reindeer which was moving and there was no moonlight whatsoever, which meant that I had to use ISO 1200, I can't even say that, ISO 12800 to get some sort of a good image. Now, did the raw photo look horrible? It did, but luckily there are some tools that can help us with the extra noise that there are, which are Tobas AI, and nowadays there is a denoise possibility also in Adobe Lightroom. See, does this photo look like it was taken at 12,800 ISO? Not really, right? The Northern Lights can be very bright, and the speed of them changes, and so does the color and the brightness and so on, so you need to be checking out the correct exposure like all the time. If you're unsure of the exposure, always underexpose a little bit. You do not want that your Northern Lights are overexposed. But again, don't underexpose too much. But indeed, underexposing is a safer bet, and that's what I pretty much always do. But the ISO you should go with depends on these two things. 1, the f-stop, and 2, the shutter speed. The ISO is something that you often decide as the last thing when you have your f-stop and your shutter speed decided. I can't unfortunately give you an exact ISO to use because it depends on different things, such as the light pollution, how bright is it where you're photographing, and the brightness of the Northern Lights. So as I mentioned, as a rule of thumb, going to ISO 3200 is absolutely fine with most cameras. Now let's talk on shutter speed. Shutter speed. You want the Northern Lights to actually appear sharp, because that's what makes them look beautiful and magical. You don't want them to look like something I call smashed potatoes, and what I mean by that is that it's like a big green mess, and you achieve that if you have way too long shutter speed. As a rule of thumb, never have your shutter speed over 10 seconds when you're photographing with the Northern Lights. That's how you achieve the big green mess, smashed potato. I know that when some people are photographing the Milky Way, then they use much longer shutter speeds, but now we are photographing the Northern Lights, so this is different. The faster the Northern Lights are going, the faster your shutter speed has to be. Often I photograph them between 1 and 5 seconds, and if they're going absolutely crazy, then I need to have the shutter speed even faster. Are you struggling to figure out the exact shutter speed to go with? Just take a sample photo and see is there motion blur in the Northern Lights. If there are, then just have a shutter speed a bit more faster, and then you should be good to go. Then let's talk focus. So as we talked, autofocus does not work at night. Do not try to use it. Use manual focus. But where and how to focus on something at night? First, to figure out where do you want to focus on, ask yourself, what do I want to focus on? Or even better, what's the thing I want someone watching this photo to focus on? If it is the star sky, very beautiful, just pick the brightest star in the sky, search for it, and then zoom into it digitally, and then adjust your focus ring until that star is sharp. And now that you take a photo, the entire sky is in focus. If it is not, then you haven't focused correctly, so just redo the process. This digital zooming thing can be found somewhere in your settings. It depends on the camera, and personally I have assigned it to one of my custom buttons, so I can just access it with one button pressing, and that's just a super fast thing to do. And I recommend that you do that as well, because when the Northern Lights are there, you don't want to be searching for your settings and figuring out where is it now, I need it. You want to have fast access to this zoom, so assign it to a custom button if you have some custom buttons in your camera. Okay, if it is something then in the foreground, let's say a person or some footprints or some animal footprints or something like that, then light that up with a headlamp or some other alternative light, and then just again zoom into those footprints or that person or whatever, and then adjust your focus ring until it is sharp. Now last and very important tip I want to say about focus is that now keeping in mind, if you do not focus stack this, I'd say always rather focus on the foreground, especially if there's some like important element. Let's say there's a reindeer, or let's say there's a human, and you have photographed the Northern Lights and they are like very sharp, then the photo can look a bit funny. It always of course depends on the photograph. Sometimes it looks great, but sometimes it looks a bit weird if everything in the foreground is like very not in focus. So rather focus on the foreground and then the northern lights still will look magical because they are like the second thing, you know, they aren't the main subject in the photograph. But of course, if they are the main subject in the photograph, then have them absolutely in focus. But oftentimes you want to have something else than the northern lights in your photos, and this leads us to the composition ideas. 4 composition tips for the northern lights. The best photos of the northern lights, in my opinion, are not just photos of the northern lights themselves. There's something else going on. There's a foreground, maybe there's mountains, maybe there's a person, there's something else. It's not often enough to just point at the sky and wish for the best. You need to have a good composition. But this can be very difficult to figure out, as when the northern lights are there, you are in like panic, like, oh my god, there are northern lights now. And then you start to figure out like, oh my god, how can I get some sort of a good composition here? And it's absolutely crazy, and I have lived that too. So let's go through some composition ideas that you could use when you are in this panic zone of trying to figure out what kind of composition to have. So have this in mind, and you will have less panic when photographing the northern lights. A human in the foreground. Having a human in a photo is one of my favorite things to do when it comes to all of photography. Like when you look at my photos, very often there is some sort of a human. But why to use this with the northern lights exactly? 1. This makes the northern lights more powerful, which is often the story you want to tell. 2. It's a quote-unquote easy subject, and you always have someone to be in the photo, because you can be in it yourself. 3. It gives you a better memory of the moment. You can see yourself or someone you care about under the northern lights. Overall, having a human in the photo, especially if they're like very small in the photo, that like will make everything just look much more magical. And by that I mean the nature looks much more magical, more powerful, we humans feel, and will be seen as less insignificant, and like actually gives perspective how small we actually are in this massive universe. And this is why I love using humans so much in my photos. I highly recommend trying this out. Here's an example of a photo I made in 2023. The footprints on the ground lead your eye to the human. The human watches the northern lights, and this creates a leading line. When you watch the human, you start to watch the lights. Something with leading lines. Leading lines are lines that lead to our subject. Let's take again this photo that I just showed you as an example. It has a person, but there's this line, the footprints leading to the person. The person on the other hand is watching the northern lights, which creates an invisible leading line. If you want a visible leading line between the human and the northern lights, then consider having a headlamp, like in this photo right here. Here the street leads your eye to the human. That's the leading line over here. The human's headlamp takes you to the sky. See, I use the person and the leading lines often together. And then in some scenarios, the lights themselves can serve as leading lines, such as in this photo. Here the lights lead the eye to the Santa Claus. He's the main subject. So footprints can be your leading lines, there can be a road can be a leading line. Basically anything where you see a line and that connects with your subject, that becomes a leading line. Framing. Frame the northern lights with something. Often this can be branches, trees, or perhaps 2 people watching the northern lights. A photo I made in 2018, it has branches framing both me and the northern lights. The lights could be appearing sharper, here they're reminding me a bit of the smashed potatoes. It all depends on the story that you want to tell, but don't just point at the sky and wish for the best. Everyone can take a photo like that. Most importantly, ask yourself, what do I want to take a photo of exactly? What am I photographing? What's the story I want to tell? When you ask these questions, your brain will start to look for the answers. Last words. Okay, so now you know how to find the northern lights, the gear you need to photograph them, the settings you need to have, and then you have some composition ideas. I hope you found this video very helpful. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you didn't already. If you're interested in receiving some Lightroom presets from me, make sure to check them out below. There's a waitlist, or they might be right now already out when you're watching this, and I will make sure to include some Northern Light presets there as well, so that you can then get most out of your beautiful raw Northern Light photos. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.